It was quite some time ago that the police report from an unresolved case of a very disturbing yet peculiar homicide came to my attention. Essentially, the incident in question was the extremely grisly murder of a teenager at a repertory cinema in the east end of the city. There was only one witness, an older gentleman in his late 70s. He will remain anonymous for now. He was able to identify both the victim and the perpetrator of this brutal murder in great detail. He was seated directly in front of the victim and the perp, and according to his statement, he didn't realize he was witnessing a murder at all until well after it was over. This is what we know. The witness attended an afternoon matinee on a Wednesday in the month of November. It was raining and quite cold. There were barely a dozen individuals in the entire cinema at the time of the incident. Most of them, also senior citizens, were seated in the front 3 rows. The witness was seated in the second row to the back. Seated directly behind him were, as he described them, an oddly matched male and female teenage couple. He had already observed them outside in the queue for the tickets, so he was able to give a very accurate description of both of them. The male individual was quite tall, well over 6 feet. He was thin and drawn with pale, sallow skin, with the veins quite visible beneath, and long, greasy black hair. The witness described him as being almost ghoulish. He estimated that he may have been between 18 to 20 years of age. He was wearing a pair of thick, black-rimmed glasses and a black raincoat. The young woman who was with him was quite the opposite. The witness described her as being vibrant and very attractive, with long flowing red hair, and quite petite in stature, maybe a couple of inches over 5 feet. She looked young, perhaps no older than 16, definitely still in high school. She too was wearing a raincoat, but hers was red. According to the witness, the young woman seemed quite enamored with her sickly-looking companion. It almost appeared as though she were hypnotized. Because he was seated 1 row from the back, our witness was turned away from the young couple. But as the cinema lights dimmed and the film began to play, he could hear the noises they were making. The following audio samples have been taken from the sergeant's interview. The witness's voice has been altered for his protection.
That was when it started. The carrying on in the back row. I knew what was coming. When I glanced back at them, those kids were still in their Rain Macs. You don't have to be a dirty old man to see through that old ploy. It's amazing what can go on, or come off, beneath a Rain Mac. First, there was the heavy breathing, and then the moaning, very low, but gradually becoming more than audible. The young man's knee had found its way up the curve of my seat back, and I felt its pressure. And all the while, the moaning increasing until it rose just a little bit above the whirring of the projector. Without even looking at them, I'd become the unwitting party to their every action. With their panting and their moaning, they were practically devouring one another, like a pair of vampires.
As the young couple behind our witness became increasingly more disruptive, he eventually confronted them.
I couldn't take it any longer. I'd sent several sideways glances in their direction, only enough to catch a glimpse of their frantic activity. But they seemed not to care. Perhaps they even got off on it, so I finally turned around to face them. They looked like one person. Their hoods of their Macs were up and crushed together, and I swear that I saw steam escaping from the darkness where their faces were locked like tightly clasped hands. The noises stopped immediately, a wee moment of silence. And then I heard it, a growl. It was like a wild animal, and not a human. I remembered this young lad, sickly as he might have looked. He was still young. And I am an old man. He would have torn me to pieces. I mumbled my disgust beneath my breath. I turned back around to face the screen and sank into my seat.
The film ended shortly after this brief but disturbing encounter, and the cinema lights came back on again. Our witness heard light footsteps treading along the carpet in the back row, and eventually fading. He suspected it was the young woman heading towards the restroom. At this point, he began to panic. He assumed that the possibly violent young male might still be seated directly behind him. Slowly, he turned his head towards the seat behind him. He noted that the air was thick with a musty smell. As he glanced back, he was startled by a hooded figure still seated and slouched over, motionless. He realized then that he was staring at the victim of a horrible murder.
Dear God, what had he done to her? Her Rain Mac was open, top to bottom. She, what was left of her, was slumped down inside it. There was very little flesh on her face, just raw, red. There were no innards, no parts left down there at all, just remnants of meat clinging to bone. If I hadn't seen her before, I couldn't even have said if it was a girl at all. These were my thoughts before I noticed the true color of the Mac. I had only thought it was red at first because my mind hadn't been able to accept so much red that wasn't plastic. And I saw his specs, crushed and broken, on the blackened, blood-soaked seat.
Concluding the witness's statement, there was an immediate search for the teenage woman. This suspect was considered extremely dangerous and possibly armed, although no weapons were identified by the witness. As yet, she has never been found, and 10 years have now passed since the incident at the cinema. All that Scotland Yard have are the gruesome and mostly devoured remains of the young man's corpse, and the witness's haunting words of warning that there is something terrible loose in this city, in this country, on this planet, that eats living guts and looks like a pretty girl. Signing off for now, Korte Robson, for Dark Places.